Sex tends to be an important connective aspect of intimate relationships. But all too often, couples find that they have different sex drives or encounter other sexual issues that leave one or both partners feeling stressed or dissatisfied. This can be especially troublesome when a couple experiences great sex while dating, an indicator that sexual compatibility is high, only to face an inexplicable disconnection down the line. Over time, I've found that even when other aspects of a romantic relationship are going well, a disruption in sexual intimacy can have far-reaching effects, including reducing self-esteem, fostering resentment, and even triggering infidelity. Today, I'm joined by a top-notch psychologist who will help us uncover the secrets to healthy and happy sexual intimacy. Today, we'll focus on this listener's real-life question. I never thought I'd be asking for help on my sex life, but I'm stumped. My partner and I used to have great sex, but now that we're married, going on 2 years, he's no longer interested. We're both in our early 40s, and if it's this bad now, I bet it's going to get worse. I enjoy sex, and touch is one of my main love languages, so his lack of interest in me is tough. I feel rejected and angry, and my self-esteem is dropping like a rock. When I try to talk to him about it, he just shuts down. He's healthy, so it's not a medical issue. Any suggestions? And with that issue as the focus of today's episode, I'm Dr. Carla Marie Manley, and this is Imperfect Love. Please note, as this episode contains sensitive information, listener discretion is advised. If you need support, please see the special links in the show notes.
Welcome to Imperfect Love with Dr. Carla Marie Manley, psychologist, author, and relationship expert. I'm here to help unravel mysteries and misconceptions about love, relationships, and mental health issues, plus everything in between. Love is complicated, people are imperfect, and relationships surely can be tough. Together, we'll navigate this messy, imperfect space of real life.
Today, I'm joined by a delightful special guest, Dr. Kate Balestrieri. She is a psychologist, certified sex therapist, and founder of Modern Intimacy. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Kate. How are you?
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here with you.
Well, you are an amazing individual and therapist, and I also want to talk a bit today about your book, What Happened to My Sex Life. But before we launch into the topic of today, could you tell our listeners just a little bit about what makes you, you?
Yeah, absolutely. I love this question. What makes me me? I think I'm probably a mix of curiosity, endless and insatiable curiosity, a willingness to go against the grain and maybe do the things that I'm not supposed to do all the time, according to social scripts. Said another way, I'm someone who will point out that the emperor's not wearing any clothes. But I'm someone who's insatiable in curiosity, dedicated to living in reality, and someone who really appreciates the complexities of the human experience. So I would say those three things probably sum it up.
Beautifully said. I think being a psychologist is a good fit for you.
Yeah, for sure.
It helps to be curious. It helps to be someone who's willing to go against the grain. And it surely helps to be, ever growing, ever changing, trying to figure things out and put together the endless puzzle pieces of life. So, when we look at today's question, the question of the day, it seems, as many of the questions do, somewhat simple, But there's a lot going on here. We don't have enough details to know how long the couple's been together or what the dynamics are, but in general. But it sounds like what was once a really fulfilling bedroom life disappeared once the ring was put on the finger. And I know this is not, from my practice, and I'm sure you see it a lot in yours, it's not uncommon, sadly.
It's so true. Desire discrepancies are probably the number one reason people seek out work with a sex therapist or a couples therapist. And it happens for myriad reasons. And I think we can have some fun hypothesizing what might be going on for this couple. But there definitely are some common themes that can lead to a slowdown in people's sex lives together once they have a more established commitment with one another.
And I would love to explore all of those various issues with you. And I also have to say that so many times when, again, social media, comparison, people see romantic partners, these images on Instagram, wherever, reading in magazines about it and think, my sex life, my romantic life is not like theirs. And we're surmising from what we see that everything is, giggles and roses in the bedroom. And we don't know. So it's really better. I really encourage people turn away from those external sources that are telling you what's right for you or what you should be doing, and turn, as this listener is doing, to what is right for her. And she sounds very tuned into herself. She knows that sex is very important to her. She knows that touch is one of her love languages, which is huge to know that that's how she ends up in many ways feeling loved and connected. So, ball's in your court.
Well, I agree with you. She does sound like someone who knows what she likes and who is willing to advocate for herself, which is really important. Um, I don't know that I have distinct answers for this listener, but the questions that I would have to start us down the path might be things like, how do you and your partner envision your roles as partners with each other? And how might that vision have evolved over time once you got married and moved in together? Because I find, and I'm sure you'll recognize this too, that there can be a pretty big love lust divide that happens when partners become more familiar with one another and they lose some of the novelty that once excited them sexually and became part of the fodder for their desire early in the relationship. But as you become more familiar, different drives take over and you start feeling more securely attached to people. And that familiarity is wonderful for building safety, but the closeness that comes with it is often the antithesis of desire because there's an absence of novelty. You're so familiar that you start to feel familial, and that can really erode desire when partners maybe are at a different level of prioritization or a different pace in infusing the relationship with newness and adventure and a sense of curiosity about one another.
I really love how you phrase that and highlight that secure attachment, really feeling connected and safe in a relationship. It doesn't mean you can't have a great sex life. Absolutely, there are many couples who feel really safe with each other and have fabulous sex life. Yet, and I've seen this quite a bit, especially if, although it can happen with females, it's not a gendered issue, but I do tend to see it more with men. And I think it has a strong biological basis where the chase, they love the chase. The chase is important. The grabbing that other person, going back for millennia to when cavemen, grabbed the women and dragged them home by the hair. That idea of capturing someone and getting them, that can be really energizing and heighten sexual appetite. And then literally when you have that person, quote unquote, for till forever do you part, then it's like, oh, the chase isn't here.
Yeah, I agree with you that the chase is a big part of the thrill for a lot of folks, but I disagree that it's a biological origin. It is very socialized along gendered lines. And for many men, There is an attachment to identity around the conquesting of getting to a yes, getting to a commitment. But for many men, the idea of marriage is both comforting but suffocating because it can extinguish those opportunities to chase after and prove one's virility or prove one's desirability through the conversion to a yes over and over again. And that is something that is certainly not limited to just men, but definitely part of the socialization of men as they compete with other men to demonstrate hierarchically their value in the competitive scale with other men. And that can play a big role in what happens for long-term partnerships in cishet relationships. There also can be a bit of a bifurcation. We tend to think about this as a Madonna whore complex, but there can be a bit of a bifurcation of women who are, for some men, lovable, respectable. They get desexualized, and they become someone that they might start a family with. However, there are women that they might have more desire for, but they don't have the same kind of respect or care for them. So that bifurcation can play a big role for some men who are organized along more traditional or precarious adherence to masculinity.
Very good background on all of this, and we'll have to agree to disagree on the biological imperative aspect of it. So I really love leaning into that idea that we can see that there are multiple factors that might be at work here. And for each couple, it may look different or will look different because there are things we don't know about the listener. What's his stress level like at work? What's his body image like? What was he like perhaps in other relationships? Did he lose interest in other partners once, the newness wore off? Was he ever in long-term relationships where the sexuality stayed high for years on end? We don't know these things. It might be this individual's pattern. But if he's shutting down when she's trying to talk about it, she may not have answers.
He may not have answers. This happens a lot where folks don't really know what's changing within them. And sometimes the shutdown reflects a difficulty in expressing one's inner experience, either because there's some ambiguity about that inner experience, or there might also be a fear of articulating what is internal and making it real in the external. But I also think that we have a lot of ideas that men are sexual inherently. And what can happen for some men in their partnership is sometimes a drop in desire can reflect fears about their sexual performance, or they may not be as interested in sex as they once were because it doesn't feel as big of a priority to them. But often when men are feeling some kind of insecurity, that can result in a shutdown. So I would be curious about mental health things as well for him. Maybe depression's a factor. We would have a lot to explore.
Absolutely. And it often presents, this is the female writing in, talking about, her significant other in a space of decline. Yet we, again, whether it's a same-sex couple, a heterosexual couple, I often see men who are saying, I love my wife. I love, everything about her, but she won't have sex with me for this reason or that reason. She's premenopausal. She's menopausal. She just had a kid. And it is whatever the reasons are. It is so frustrating for the other person. And that is often where that frustration, if it's not worked on between the couple and or in therapy, then it becomes this source of resentment. And sometimes people skip over trying to talk about it altogether. And they just lean straight into infidelity, which is not a good solution to the problem.
No, definitely not. It makes things worse more often than not. But Yeah, I think there's a truth here, and it's also really important to honor that both the higher desire and the lower desire partner are often carrying a different kind of shame or a different kind of fear around what it might mean to be the higher desire or the lower desire partner. The listener who wrote into you, I'd be really curious about what would for her feel like a fulfilling sex life. What are the things that bring meaning to her in sexual contact? And if her partner is not able or willing to meet her in that, what are the ways that she explores those sexual interests on her own? Or perhaps maybe is there an opportunity to invite other partners in as long as their fidelity agreements sustain that? But I would probably be really curious with what does she want to know about herself or learn about herself or reconnect within herself as she thinks about prioritizing sex in a solo exploration.
And that's such an important avenue. And you're a sex therapist, which is, I mean, some people say they're sex therapists, but they don't have the credentials, and you have the credentials. So looking at this, and I'm going to post something to you that this listener didn't, but that I've heard when I talk with people about it, they'll say, well, that's not my job to explore something solo.
Mm.
I don't want to go outside the relationship. I want my partner. So if they're putting a hard stop on that, I'm imagining maybe this listener has thought about that. I'm just imagining. But let's say there's a hard stop on that. What can be done aside from her going solo within the relationship or having a fidelity agreement to get her sexual needs met outside of the relationship, which that's a really tough thing for many people to navigate because the partner who's low on sex drive then feels neglected and hurt and jealous and all of those things. Doesn't have to be that way, but it
Yeah.
it, it can be that way. So what would you say? Let's just imagine that those other two options aren't a fit for this individual.
Yeah, it is a really difficult spot, and many couples do find themselves there. Well, that where they'll say, the higher desire partner might say, you know what, I've done all the solo sex I want to do. I really want connection with my partner. And I think what's important is that if they're both willing for the couples to enter into a couples therapy process where they can be supported in exploring what has sex taken on in terms of metaphor in their relationship, that there is such an impasse around it. What does it mean to each of them that for one person it's very important, for the other person they're shut down? Because often sex becomes a vehicle for a different conversation in the relationship. So I would wonder if they were willing to work together to unearth a bit more exploration on the meaning that they're holding on to. And that might give them more space to find some middle ground where they both feel aligned and more excited. Because often, what can happen in partnerships is when there is a big desire discrepancy, the lower desire partner feels a mix of guilt and obligation to be sexual with the higher desire partner. And that's just not very sexy, right? And it can often reinforce a decrease in desire if they feel like they're capitulating to the higher desire partner's needs. So we don't want that as a solution. And the higher desire partner might be sitting with fears of being too much, or they might feel very frustrated and they might feel very neglected. So you can start to feel resentment on both sides of this equation. But when couples can get really real about, I want to connect with you, I want to feel your presence. It's not just about the performance of sex, but what is the opportunity for joining? And is that important to both people? And I think sometimes that's a path that actually can excite some enthusiasm for couples to find a resolution, but it might also unearth some hard truths. Maybe one partner isn't really feeling the relationship anymore and they haven't yet found the words to articulate that. Maybe they're going through something else that's hard and they're afraid might rupture the relationship. So sometimes the shutdown is a protective mechanism to preserve a partnership that they really care about and want, but maybe aren't feeling access to or feeling like they know how to move forward in. So it can open up conversations that are hard when you are really honest about what the sex means to you both and why it is or isn't accessible in the moment.
I so appreciate this line of thought and feeling because you're right. When we do see sexuality as what it is, right, aside from the human act of having sexual intercourse, that for many people, for some, it's purely sex and it's just, hey, I have desire, I want to get my needs met, done, that's all, that's it. For other people, it is a way of feeling loved and seen and connected and cherished and valued. It's not about procreation. It's not about getting your desires met. It's about the connection. And I think that's so wonderful that you address that, because if we aren't able to talk through this with a partner, then in order to move through the impasse, having a psychotherapist, a sex therapist, someone who really works in this realm a lot to help you see that sometimes, as in many cases in psychotherapy, the thing isn't the thing. That it, as you're saying, it's not about sex. It is about maybe work is hard, maybe levels of testosterone have dropped significantly and there's just not the desire anymore. Maybe it's some sort of unresolved trauma that has reared its head that needs attention. But unless we're willing to talk about it, we can't move through it. We can't find the fix. So those conversations, but here is often, again, where the shutdown happens. And then people say, well, I don't want to go to therapy.
Right. I don't want to go to therapy. I don't want to talk about it. These are all self-protection mechanisms. And this is where it can be very frustrating for one partner who's like, hey, we've got to move the needle forward here a little bit. We've got to find some resolution. There's an urgency, sometimes even a desperation. And the other partner can feel that. And instead of feeling that as an opportunity for growth, it feels like pressure and it results in a further shutdown. So sometimes it does require partners to take their foot off the gas a little and give their other partner some space to come back online. But this can lead to long-term impasses in partnerships if both people are not willing to take some energy and some effort toward finding some sort of movement, right? You don't even have to find a resolution or a solution necessarily, but some movement to get dislodged from the stuckness.
Absolutely. And even if it's something, say they haven't carved out enough time where, couple time or whatever, date nights, which we often think, oh, well, we'll just set aside time for a date night. But often, if it's for some people, it works really well. For other people, it is again back to that. Now I have to perform. Now I'm pressured. Now I'm obligated. So what do you think? How do you help couples who are finding that even a date night solution? They find a sitter for the kids. I don't think this couple, they haven't mentioned kids, but they find a sitter for the kids, or they, cover the bed with rose petals and have massage oils ready, and there's still no interest.
Yeah. Well, it often in that case is a bit deeper, and sometimes there is a medical issue. Sometimes there's a medication side effect. Sometimes there is a deeper seated fear, anxiety, or resentment in the relationship that might need to get worked out, that might feel hard for one or both partners to address. I would say there's a lot more to explore, but if it is something more complex than we don't make the time to have the sex life that we want, then the question is, for me, well, what's getting in the way of you making the time? And that usually reflects a deeper process, either intrinsically or relationally, to be explored.
Okay, so let's say this couple, we're using the question as a vehicle to go a little deeper. Let's say there is some unresolved trauma something that maybe the wife doesn't even know about. Doesn't have to be around sexuality. It can be something else that doesn't even have to be with the partner, because often unresolved trauma, even from childhood, starts rearing its head in the romantic relationship because an individual believes unconsciously that love, close connection forever, means abuse or criticism, or whatever they might have experienced at the hands of parents, caregivers, or perhaps a very toxic relationship earlier on. So let's just imagine that maybe this individual, just to keep going a bit deeper with it for possibilities, let's imagine there's some blockage there. So we have a partner who seems very willing and motivated. Maybe they would be absolutely interested in going to sex therapy with their partner, but the partner is so afraid. And I think we've both seen this in our work. The partner is so afraid and shut down using those self-protective mechanisms of no, stonewalling. And he doesn't want her to go outside the marriage. She already knows that. She's not interested in having a solo sex life. And maybe she's been there, done that, doesn't find it satisfying. So now what?
Well, they have some really hard conversations and choices to make about what they want from life and what they want from a relationship. And I'm sure you've seen this in your practice, but there are many relationships where partners will sit in this sort of ambiguity for a while with each other, and they'll give each other space to have this maybe organically get unstuck. And sometimes that's useful, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it requires one or both partners taking a bigger action to unstick the stuck points and again get some traction. So to that higher desire partner, it often falls on their shoulders to be the person to say, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. So now I have to make some decisions about whether or not I'm okay being in partnership with someone who's not willing to talk about it, not willing to work on it, and not willing to find resolution about this issue. If that kind of shutdown is happening around sex, I imagine that kind of shutdown might be happening around other domains of the relationship. So, really, it's up to the partners to decide, is this something that is going to be sustainable for me? And each person has to set their own timeline for that. Some people might say, oh, after a year of this, I can't make this work anymore. Some people might say, it's been 5 years or 10 years, and I've got a little more time because I really love this person, and these other aspects of our relationship are great. But really, we have to get real about what responsibility we're willing to take over our own pleasure, and to think about how you want to get creative within the landscape that you've decided makes sense for you.
Beautifully said. And I think it's so important for people to realize in some relationships, especially if we get rid of societal expectations. And once we remove that voice that maybe, I'm not saying it is, that may be saying, I should be having sex with my partner every day, or 3 times a week, or 5 times a week, or once a month. For some partners, they agree that once every 3 months, once every year, once every never is okay for them. But in those cases, their sexual desires are aligned or ultimately become aligned. And that's why, as you're saying, the conversation to realize, what does sex mean to me? Is it pleasure? And for some people, it really is all about pleasure. And for some people, it's pleasure and connection. And for some people, as I said earlier, it is just connection. That they could actually throw away the sex if they felt connected to their partner in other ways.
Yeah, the important thing to remember is that human beings have one constant, and that is that we are endlessly diverse. So it's very difficult sometimes for partners in partnership to be aligned in everything at the same time in the same way. And that makes for very inconvenient lives, right? Because you may want to prioritize sex and your partner may want to deprioritize sex. You may be hungry at one time and your partner may be full. So really there's a question of alignment and evaluating how well does the relationship in its totality work for me? How does it light me up? How do I feel safe in this relationship, expansive, whatever's important to you, your values. It's an ongoing evaluation and assessment because people change over time. And so what worked for you 2 years ago may not work anymore now.
Absolutely. And going back to that idea, as you're saying so beautifully, that relationships are not static. They move, they shift because we are diverse, multifaceted people, that it's so important, again, to use the skills of communication. We don't know how she is communicating with him, but if she's really has strong emotional intelligence, then she's likely using iMessages, but perhaps we're guessing here, maybe she's saying things like, you're not a good lover, you're not taking care of me, which is going, if that's the case, that's going to increase shame and guilt and resentment. So really, I often talk about it like a kitchen. Sex is just normal. It's a healthy part of relationships, just like being in the kitchen. And we don't hesitate to say, I'm not hungry tonight, or I'm extra hungry, or I'd like more salt, or I'd like more pepper, or let's try something different. So if we can bring that attitude into our conversations around sexuality, and perhaps she's not tried this before, but maybe talk with a psychotherapist or get some coaching from a very trusted friend, do some role play of how could we say something to the individual, and especially if they're highly defensive and feeling or just feeling criticized, that finding a way to speak to the partner in a non-blaming, connective, uplifting way, like, hey honey, I really desire you and I miss cuddling with you, or I miss, doing foreplay with you. Can we do a little bit of that? And see what the partner's response is when we start with something like, I miss the connection.
Mm.
I miss the yumminess.
Mm. I love that. Yeah, it is really important. And a lot of folks center penetration as the focal point of their pleasure. And when we can be a bit more expansive and a bit more open about what pleasure can look like, there often are more opportunities for people to find a place to meet, right? Because there might be some hesitation about penetration for whatever reason, but perhaps a partner's desire is more responsive, and maybe some kissing and some massaging on the shoulders or something like that might feel mutually beneficial and might actually wake up some desire in the lower desires partner's body. I wouldn't encourage engaging in non-sexual physical touch just to curate sexual intimacy. But when you work those things into your partnership on a more regular basis, if it's something you're both open to, it can create more erotic charge that sort of lives there like a quiet hum, ready to be harvested. When those things aren't existing in partnership, it can sometimes feel like a bigger uphill climb to start from nothing to get to desire.
Wonderfully put, because like you're saying, and I'm leaning into the part of the listener's question where she says, touch is one of my love languages.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe he's bringing her flowers, maybe he's taking out the trash or, doing the laundry. And if touch is one of her biggest love languages, those acts of service may not register at all. And he might be thinking, I'm doing all of this for you and you're not even noticing. So if she's able to communicate, as you're saying, let's start with touch. Doesn't have to stay with just a massage, but starting with a caress where the stakes are fairly low. Stakes are
Mhm.
fairly low in a massage. You generally can't underperform or fail to perform. And see if, as you're saying, see if that starts waking up moments of desire. Kissing her neck, kissing his neck, kissing, somebody's shoulders or belly. So all of these little things that don't carry generally a lot of trauma kind of weight with them, a lot of I must perform.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's important to find out more information about if touch is accessible for him too, because for some folks, touch doesn't feel safe. And if they are in a headspace where they're activated around trauma triggers or they're feeling perhaps depressed or anxious, touch might actually feel less safe and it might put them further away from desire. So even though touch is her love language, it may be something that signals to him more obligation, more fear. So, again, here's where communication feels so important and really getting curious about what does he need right now? What does he need to feel more in his body? What does he need to feel safer in the partnership? What does he need to feel safe in his sexuality? And maybe safe isn't the right word. Maybe invigorated is a word. So, what does that look like? What kind of sex have they been having? Is it the kind of sex that interests them both? Have one or both of their fantasy lives changed and taken a different direction? So, I think I'd be a lot more curious about kind of whether or not his shutdown is self-protective or if there's a part of him that actually thinks he's protecting the relationship from something that may have changed in him.
And again, conversation.
Mhm.
Conversation, that which we're not willing to talk about in any relationship,
Mhm.
can't move. It's what we do for a living, isn't it? We help people talk about the things that feel impossible to talk about or difficult to talk about. Or as you said very wisely earlier, sometimes things that need to be talked about that we don't even know needed to be talked about.
Mhm.
So moving into therapy, not to fix broken people, but to fix dynamics to ones that work. And again, starting with some conversations, and maybe the conversation that is next in line is the one about maybe it's time to see a couples therapist who can help them navigate. And often, even though that's scary for a lot of people, often having that third individual in the room who's non-judgmental and so caring, it's not as scary as I get such positive feedback. People are like, oh my goodness, it's so good to have a third person here who's helping us through this muck. Because in our own relationships we often can't see what an objective neutral third party who is well trained can see in often one session. You can start really to get the flavor of what's happening. Oh my goodness. Dr. Kate, are there any, I know we could talk about this one for quite a bit longer because there's lots to explore, but are there any other highlights you'd like to mention?
Well, I think what's important to highlight is that pleasure can take many forms. And so, if for whatever reason sexual pleasure is a thing that's inaccessible in your partnership and you're really feeling a want for it, I might encourage this listener and anyone else who this may apply to think about ways to really cultivate and savor and relish other kinds of pleasure. And it's not necessarily a substitute for sex, but it can be a way to really access some of the same needs that you have if you're able to and willing to make an extra minute to really savor the delicious lunch that you're having and take it in a sensory way and enjoy all of the elements of it that are wonderful for you. Or lay in the sun on a blanket and really soak up the warmth of those rays. Whatever it might be, returning to the body in a way that can build pleasure and an enjoyment can be another place to access some of the same needs that we might get through sex.
Thank you for highlighting that because we often forget all of the sources out there beyond, the more obvious ones like food or wine, we can also see that our bodies generally love pleasure in other ways, like, go for a massage, not replacing a sex life, but possibly it's a nice balm to the soul and to her body. Massage, a pedicure, a walk in the rain, some time in the ocean, things that just naturally feel good. Just feel good, and diving into that, which is nice because it's also not other dependent. It helps you remind you of being in your body and how good it feels to feel just in your skin, a lovely dress, that's, the bit of silk on you. Just, there are so many ways to experience pleasure naturally. And let's hope, because sex is so important to this individual and to many of us, hope that she is able to connect with her husband in ways that really help the relationship stay on a bonded, healthy track for a long time to come.
I hope so too.
Dr. Kate, where can our listeners find you?
My website is modernintimacy.com, and that's probably the best place to start. But I'm also on TikTok and Instagram and Threads at Dr. Kate Balestrieri. And of course, my book, What Happened to Your Sex Life, is a great starting point to understand some of how I approach desire in life. I think that's about it.
Okay, and listeners, don't worry, it will all be in the show notes. So again, Dr. Kate's book, What Happened to My Sex Life, her website, Modern Intimacy, and I'm going to spell her last name because it is a bit of a mouthful. It's Balestrieri. Try to do that 3 times very quickly. All right. Thank you, Dr. Kate. It's been such a joy to have you with us today.
Thank you.
And to our listeners, thank you for sharing your time and your energy with us today. And this is Imperfect Love.
Thanks so much for sharing your time with me today. Remember, you have the power to transform your life and love fearlessly, if imperfectly, and it's my privilege to help you along the way. You can find more life-changing content, including my books and other podcast episodes, at drcarlamanley.com. Feel free to submit your own confidential questions through my website. I'll do my very best to include your issue on a future episode. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Until we connect again, this is Dr. Carla Marie Manley wishing you oceans of blessings and love. Please note, this podcast is psychoeducational in nature and is not intended to replace formal mental health support. Please contact your healthcare provider or emergency hotline if you need psychiatric care. And, as always, please take good care of your amazing, wonderful self.